Our 68 Camaro project originally had a vinyl top, and it's very common for cars with vinyl tops to hold water in the top material and then they rust out the roof of the car. This one, the rust was real bad around the window areas, especially the rear window, on both the vertical sides, the top horizontal area, and then the trunk filler panel between the bottom of the rear window edge and the rear deck lid. Those areas in some places completely rusted through. So this stage of the game, we're going to make some repairs to fix all that stuff. There's a couple different ways to approach this kind of repair. In our case, we're also going to be running a flush glass kit from Auto Glass Innovations. So we started by taking a cutoff wheel and removing all of the original trim studs that held the polished stainless trim in place around the windows. We're not going to be using that with this classic Auto Glass Innovations kit. One way to do this repair is to put a whole new roof skin on the car. Camaros are very popular and you can get a new roof skin from places like Classic Industries. The other way to do it is to make your own patches and stitch those in where necessary. And we kind of did a hybrid. We decided to use a piece of a new roof skin and stitch that in. We didn't want to remove the entire roof on this car because the rest of it was in nice shape, surprisingly. Being a vinyl top car, you'd think the whole top side would be pitted, but it wasn't. It was very solid. And we try not to disturb, big sections of the car if we don't really absolutely have to. So the next step was to carefully mark off the area we were going to remove from the roof skin patch panel and then transfer those dimensions to the actual car body. And then we went in with a cutoff wheel and carefully cut out the rusted piece and then used a spot weld drill to drill out all the spot welds in the pinch weld area, and then we could remove that rusty piece of steel from the Camaro's original roof. With the rusty steel cut out, we were left with a big hole in the roof, and Nick carefully fit that hole to the new panel. And in this case, you want to just creep up on it slowly. You want to grind a little bit, put your new piece in place and check it, and make sure that you don't overcut it because then you got to close up a big hole. He also cleaned up the area inside the car in that exposed cavity using some 3M roll-lock sanding discs and other things that would fit in there to make sure that all the rust was removed. When Nick was satisfied with the fit of the repair piece, he used a punch and punched a bunch of holes in the new piece of steel so that it could be plug welded together. And then he pulled out a whole bunch of clamps and clamped it all in place and began the plug welding process in the window ledge area. And once it was thoroughly welded along that edge, he went back and very slowly, tack by tack, welded up the seam using a MIG welder. And the trick here is to keep the heat down so you don't warp the roof. But this piece is interesting because it's curved in two different directions, so the metal is a little bit stronger than just a flat piece, so it kind of resists warping more than normal. Once all of the welding is done, there's a process of grinding those welds down to make sure that everything ends up nice and flush. All right, so now it was time to remove the rust from the bottom edge of the window, and the simplest approach here is to remove and replace that trunk filler panel. This had rust not only at the window edge, but a little bit further down the panel where the vinyl top held water, where it mounted to the car, where the trim mounted. So to remove these, it's a series of finding all the little spot welds and drilling them out and carefully prying and tapping. And you can use a cutting torch, like a plasma torch, to cut the majority out and then go back and clean up all the little welds, once you gain more access. The repair panel came from Classic Industries, and it's a really nice fitting piece. It's very accurate, and this one's kind of a tricky one because it not only has that window channel, but it also has the top edge of the trunk area, and it's got to fit properly so the weather strip fits and that the trunk doesn't leak. A key here is to make sure you're only replacing one panel at a time. If you blew off both the quarter panels and then remove this, you'd lose a lot of your reference points. So in our case, the quarters were still intact when we decided to put this piece in. You could see where the original panel left a hole there, that that area was full of surface rust and old garbage. So we took some time to clean that up. The outside of the car was eventually going to get media blasted, but inside there is one of those areas that you really can't get to. So we used some 3M purple abrasive wheels to knock down the surface rust, and you know, any kind of sanding wheel and grinding wheel you need to fit in there, you use. There's really no wrong answer. For some added insurance, we sprayed the area with some Eastwood Fast Etch, which is an acid product which eliminates any remaining rust, and neutralized that with some of their pre-wax and grease remover, and then sprayed the whole area with a black enamel, just like an industrial black enamel, which will prevent this from rusting and keep everything clean inside. The next step for the panel was to pre-drill a bunch of pilot holes for the plug weld operation. HTP makes a product called Primal Weld, which is a paste brushable weld-through primer that we applied to both the panel and to the car wherever there was going to be a weld action. And this makes sure that these welds are prepped properly and that they have good contact and they remain clean. Then the panel was sheet metal screwed in place, and we checked it a couple times to make sure it was in the right spot before the weld operation happened. And here Nick again used a plug weld technique to carefully weld up all the holes around the perimeter of the panel and lock it in place. Again, you want to make sure you kind of jump around when you do your weld operation to keep the heat down. But you'll note how clean these welds are happening. They're nice and smooth, not a lot of sputtering and spitting, and a lot of that is thanks to new steel, proper preparation, and that Primal Weld product inside those holes. After all the welds were done, Nick went around and carefully ground down all of the plug welds to make everything nice and smooth. And then we decided to take it one more step across the top of the car where the previous upper channel repair had been made, and use an old school technique of using lead to kind of fill that seam. Now, we didn't have much of a seam, but there were some slight surface imperfections and grind marks on the welding areas and things like that. So Eastwood now sells a leading kit that doesn't use old school dangerous lead. It's a new, synthetic lead material that you heat up and paddle in the same way you did the old stuff, and it provides a nice solid foundation for body filler and paintwork over the top. And if it was good enough for the factory to use over the quarter seams and things like that and lasted, 40 years, it's good enough for us. So we think the top of the car came out really slick using that lead approach. The leading process isn't very complex, but it does take some practice. You have to make sure the area is completely spotless, no grease, rust, paint, or anything like that. You heat it up with a torch. We used a MAP gas torch to make it hot quickly, and then you simply dab the stuff in and it melts into place, and then you kind of mush it down with a wooden paddle, and this pushes it into formation. And then when it cools, the nice thing about the new synthetic stuff is that you can actually sand it and file it, and the dust isn't as toxic as actual lead. So that took care of the top and the bottom edge of our rear window. The sides, the one side is going to be replaced when we replace the entire quarter panel, which we'll show you next time on the '68 Camaro.